The guard was writing when Patton first saw him, logbook open, pen moving, shoulders relaxed. From 50 feet away, in the grey April light of a prisoner compound outside Tridia, he looked like a clerk finishing his morning paperwork. Dole. Patton kept walking. At 30 feet, the man in the mud came into view, an American soldier, on one knee, hands raised to his face, not fighting, just absorbing. There was blood at his collar. His right shoulder sat wrong in the socket. The guard capped his pen, closed the logbook, returned it to his breast pocket. Everything about the scene looked like administration. April 1945, 3 weeks from the end of the war. Nobody knew that yet. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories about when the shield became the weapon. Dandadori. Staff Sergeant Raymond Kowalski was 27 years old, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Before the war, he operated an overhead crane at a steel plant on the Monongahela River, guiding 40-ton ladles of molten steel with the kind of precision that tolerates no error. He had survived Normandy, the Hurtgen Forest, and 11 days of the Bulge before a German ambush outside Bastogne took his squad. He was the only one captured alive. He had been at the Tridia compound for 14 weeks. He had learned to read the guards, the rhythms, which ones were indifferent and which ones were looking for something to prove. He kept his head down. He worked when ordered. He counted days. On the morning of April 7th, a wounded man collapsed in the mud during roll call. Kowalski stepped one step out of formation to pull him upright. One step. The guard was on him in 4 seconds. Dumbat. Unteroffizier Franz Dietrich was 41 years old, from Regensburg, Bavaria. Before the war, he had spent 12 years as a prison administrator at Stadelheim prison in Munich, processing inmates, maintaining schedules, enforcing what he called Lagerordnung, camp order. He had never fired a weapon in anger. He had never seen the Eastern Front or the beaches of Normandy. He was 41 and overweight, and the Wehrmacht had no use for him at the front, so they put him where his skills were useful, behind a fence, administering men who had already been defeated. In the compound, Dietrich had authority. That authority had a document behind it. He kept it in his breast pocket, folded once, worn at the creases, a printed extract of paragraph 54 of the Geneva Convention, which permitted camp commanders to impose disciplinary measures for violations of camp regulations. He had underlined 2 phrases in pencil: disciplinary measures, good order. Those 4 words were his entire arsenal. He had used them 37 times in 14 weeks. Each incident logged with the time, the prisoner's number, and the paragraph number cited. He believed with complete institutional sincerity that he was doing his job correctly. He did not notice the 4 stars on the helmet of the man walking toward him. By April 1945, the Third Army had overrun more than 60 prisoner facilities across Germany and occupied territory. What they found existed on a spectrum. At one end, compounds where prisoners were housed and fed at subsistence level and not systematically killed. At the other, facilities where the line between a POW camp and a death camp had dissolved entirely. The Tridia compound sat in the middle of that range, which in some ways made it harder to address. There were no mass graves, no gas chambers, only the slow grinding application of petty authority against men who had no recourse, justified at every step by paragraph numbers from a document written to protect the men it was now being used to harm. Allied officers at the corps and division level had accepted this framing. There were larger problems. The advance was still moving. Logistics were stretched. The camps would be dealt with properly after the surrender. File the report. Note the concern. Move on. That tolerance ended the morning. Patton walked the Tridia perimeter. Dodder. Patton did not shout. He walked. Dodder. By the time he reached Dietrich, the guard had stepped back from Kowalski and was opening his logbook. Automatic, professional. He was writing the prisoner's number before Patton arrived. Captain Horace Webb, Patton's aide, stepped forward to translate. Patton asked what the guard had just done. Dietrich answered without hesitation. The prisoner had broken formation without authorization. The regulation permitted corrective action. The matter was being logged as required. Patton looked at Kowalski, still on one knee in the mud, one hand pressed against the shoulder where the truncheon had landed, then back at Dietrich. He asked why the prisoner had stepped out of line. Dietrich said the reason was irrelevant. The regulation did not require a reason. Prisoners were to remain in formation until dismissed. The prisoner had not. The corrective action was authorized. Patton asked to see the logbook. Dietrich handed it over. 37 entries. Dates, prisoner numbers, paragraph citations, clean handwriting, every incident documented. Patton turned the pages slowly, without speaking. Then he closed the logbook. He asked one question, whether paragraph 54 was written to protect camp order or to protect the men inside the camp. Dietrich opened his mouth, closed it, said nothing. The compound was silent. Patton set the logbook flat against Dietrich's chest and let go, forcing the guard to grab it or let it drop. Then he took 2 steps back and turned to face the full compound. His voice did not rise, it settled. He told Dietrich he had read paragraph 54. He had read the entire convention. He understood precisely what it permitted and precisely what it was written to prevent. He said the convention was not written to give a man with a truncheon a piece of paper to hide behind. It was written by men who had watched the previous war produce cruelty on a scale that shamed every nation that participated in it. They wrote it because they believed that even in captivity, a man retained a basic claim to his own body. That was the document's purpose, not to authorize what he had just witnessed, to prevent it. He pointed at the logbook in Dietrich's hands. He said that logbook was not a record of discipline. It was a record of 37 separate decisions to use a regulation written to protect prisoners as a tool to injure them instead. Every entry was a violation dressed in the language of compliance. Dietrich had underlined the useful phrases and ignored the rest, the way a man reads a contract looking only for what he can extract rather than what he agreed to provide. He looked at Kowalski, who was on his feet now, saying nothing, watching. He said this man stepped out of formation to help a wounded soldier. That single act, one step, one hand extended, represented more genuine order than anything recorded in that logbook. Because order is not men standing rigid in a line while one of them dies in the mud. Order is men who know what they owe each other and pay it, even when it costs them something. He turned back to Dietrich. He said Dietrich had confused obedience with order, compliance with discipline, and paperwork with authority. A man who carries a regulation in his breast pocket and a truncheon in his right hand has already decided which one he intends to use. The paperwork is the story he tells afterward. He paused. He said the convention's full title was not the document permitting guards to strike prisoners. It was the convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. That word had a meaning. The men who wrote it intended one. Dietrich had 2 choices: surrender the truncheon and the logbook to Captain Webb right now, or explain to a war crimes tribunal why 37 entries all cited the same paragraph against men who were already disarmed, already defeated, already unable to fight back. He had 10 seconds to decide. Dietrich extended both items before the count reached 5. Before Patton left the compound that afternoon, he issued a standing order for every 3rd Army prisoner facility. German guards were prohibited from carrying any implement capable of use as a striking weapon. Every disciplinary action required countersignature from an American officer before it could be executed. Paragraph 54 still existed. The shield had been removed, dud. The truncheon and the logbook were placed together in a wire basket on the processing table near the gate. An MP attached a paper tag. Personal effects. Unteroffizier Franz Dietrich, April 7, 1945. Dietrich was assigned to the labor detail, the same compound, the same mud, the same roll call at 6 a.m., but now he stood in the formation line rather than walking beside it. He was issued a number. An American corporal wrote it in a logbook without looking up, the way a man records routine paperwork. The first morning, a sergeant walked the formation and stopped in front of Dietrich for a long moment. Said nothing, moved on. There was no truncheon, there was no need for one. Lock Raymond Kowalski returned to Pittsburgh in August 1945. The steel plant gave him his crane back. He worked it for 22 more years, retiring in 1967 with both shoulders intact, except for a deep ache in the right one on cold mornings that he never mentioned to his wife until the year before he died. His son asked him once about a small framed photograph on the study wall, just a field of brown mud with tents and a grey sky, nothing in it worth hanging. Kowalski looked at it for a moment before answering. He said he kept it there so he would remember the morning. A general walked 50 feet across a compound to stop something he could have kept walking past. He died in 1984. The photograph was still on the wall. The administration at Stadelheim declined to reinstate him. He spent the following years in a municipal records office, filing documents, maintaining schedules, keeping what he still privately called order. He never expressed regret. He told his neighbors the convention had permitted everything he had done. He died in 1971, remembered as a quiet and precise man who kept careful records of everything. Patton did not include the Tridia incident in his memoirs or his operational reports. A staff officer who had been present recalled in a post-war interview that on the drive back from the compound, Patton had been silent for several miles, watching the German countryside through the windscreen of the Jeep. Then he said something quietly, more to himself than to anyone present. The staff officer remembered it as, "A man who keeps a careful log of the harm he does has already decided the harm is defensible. That is the most dangerous kind." Some historians argue that Patton's removal of Dietrich from guard duty bypassed the formal military legal channels that existed to adjudicate precisely these disputes, that the convention's disciplinary provisions, however imperfect, could only be reformed through proper complaint processes rather than a general's summary decision on a compound perimeter. They contend that Patton's intervention, however morally satisfying, set a precedent for commanders overriding legal frameworks based on individual judgment. Others argue the opposite, that formal channels had consistently failed to address systematic abuse in POW facilities because no single incident cleared the threshold for formal action, and that Patton understood the mechanism being exploited and dismantled the mechanism rather than addressing the incident, which was the only response proportionate to a pattern that paperwork alone had never stopped. What is certain is that not a single disciplinary action was recorded in the Tridia compound without American countersignature for the remainder of the war. No. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have filed a formal complaint through proper channels, or would you have done exactly what he did, right there, without waiting for a tribunal? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories about when the shield became the weapon, make sure to subscribe.